And today we'll be talking. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the English class. Today we will be discussing a sentence. If you have been on the classes with me, in the past class, we have talked about the clause, and then the class we had before that, we discussed the phrase. Now, I decided to start from the phrase over to the clause and then to end it on a sentence because this three leads into one another. Now, the phrase can be brought together with a finite verb to form a clause. And then when you add two clauses together, it is there that you have a sentence. So without further ado, we'll move forward to what we are discussing today. And the topic is the sentence. Grammatically, in the English language, the sentence is at the highest rank when it comes to grammatical expression, either spoken or written. As a matter of fact, the sentence is the most powerful aspect of the English language, such that anything you say or anything you try to express or anything you write, it is judged on the competence of the sentence. Now, I use the word competence of the sentence because everything you say will be taken to either work as a complete sentence or an incomplete sentence. So when we define a phrase, we said a phrase was anytime we discuss a phrase, we say a phrase is an incomplete sentence. That is to tell you that sometimes when we discuss the sentence, it has a very, very important factor considered anytime we have the English language in discourse. So without wasting our time, let's go into the definition, maybe one or two definition of the sentence so that we can know what it looks like, or if we're going to form a sentence, if you have not been doing that before, we know what we should have in it, or maybe if there are some gray areas that we need to know, or there are some things that we need to know about the sentence. Today, we should be able to put light on those areas. What is a sentence? A sentence, as you have there, is a group of words having a complete, that is the most important. By the time you are expressing something or you want to say something, you must know that if you are able to relate or communicate or express an idea completely, it means you have been able to achieve a sentence. There's something we call the grammatical rank scale in the English language, and then the formation goes from a phoneme into a morpheme, from a morpheme into a word. You bring words together to form a phrase. By the time you add a finite verb into a phrase, it becomes a clause. Now, when you join clauses together, basically, when you join a main clause and a subordinate clause together, you should have a sentence. So it is when you have a sentence that you may have a complete thought. Because basically, even while talking about the clauses, it is possible that we have an incomplete thought. Yes, we may say that a clause can express a complete thought, and at the same time, a clause may not express a complete thought. Because a subordinate clause is not going to relate a complete thought. Rather, it will rely on a main clause to have its meaning understood. And to put it further, we said a sentence must contain, it is compulsion. It is compulsion, compulsorily that you have a sentence and a verb. Now, if you look at it, in a way, if you have a sentence, if you have a subject and a verb in a composition, it could be a clause. So what we're trying to say is that while defining the sentence, we may be putting the definition of a main clause as part of the definition of a sentence. Now, another definition says that a sentence is that part that is complete in itself, typically containing a subject and a predicate. Now, I remember that in the last class, we tried to clarify what a subject is and what a predicate is. We'll say, when you write a sentence, the noun that is to take up an action is the subject. Either a word, either a noun phrase, or a noun clause, and it is the actor that is going to carry out the action in the sentence. You call it a subject. And every other thing after the subject is taken to be the predicate. Now, a sentence may be conveying a statement, that it could mean an expressed statement. It could mean a question. A sentence can also be a question. It could be an exclamation, that is something that you express for emotional responses, or a command, or something that you call an imperative statement. So don't forget that a sentence can be a statement, a question, an exclamatory statement, or a command. And it consists of a main clause, and sometimes you may have one or more subordinate clauses in it. So basically what we're trying to say is this, that your sentence may just be a clause, preferably a main clause, or it will be a main clause and one or more subordinate clauses. That is to say that you can have a clause as a sentence, and it will be a simple sentence, which is something that we'll look at in the other part as we proceed in this class. And then the subordinate clauses are those that cannot stay on their own, or that cannot exist on their own while you are explaining them. Now the sentence types. For the sentence types, there are two categories. A sentence by typology have two categories. The first category is the sentence by structure, and the second typology is by function. That is, when you call something a sentence, or whatever type you want to call it, it has a definite structure. It has a definite structure. Now, when you come across that structure, you will be able to say, okay, fine, this particular structure represents this type of sentence, this particular structure represents this type of sentence, and this particular structure represents this type of sentence. And then from there, we'll move on to the functions. Now, that is when you make a sentence, or when you write a sentence, it performs a particular function. It gives a kind of action that expects a reaction. Scientifically, there's something that they say that for every action, there is a reaction towards it. So now, the same thing happens in English language. The sentences that we have, the sentences that we speak, the sentences that we use, when we use them, they try to create a scenario of action and responses. So without wasting our time, we'll go to the first part of the diagram is the simple. From the simple, we have the complex. From the complex, we have the compound. And from the compound, we have the compound complex. Now, each of these structures have the way they are presented. So that when you come across them, you'll be able to say that, okay, this is a simple sentence, this is a compact sentence, this is a complex sentence, and this is a compound complex sentence. So without wasting our time, we'll dive into each of these. The first one we're talking about is a simple sentence. A simple sentence has just one independent clause, or better still, it is just a main clause. It is just a main clause. And you realize that in a main clause, you have one verbal structure working there. It has one verbal structure coordinating that part of the sentence. And as we have it in an example, you can surprise a man with a dog. Now, the verbal structure that we have there is kind and surprise. Kind is working as a modal auxiliary verb, and then surprise is working as our lexical verb. So this is just a simple expression. You can surprise a man with a dog. That's just the expression. It is simple. It has one verbal structure working with it. As a matter of fact, if you're going to divide these into subject and predicates, you is your subject, and then can surprise a man with a dog becomes your predicate. So this is an example of a simple sentence. So what you're going to do for me is this. I have decided that in this class, I will give us
jump.
a simple sentence will have one main clause in it. So with the example that we have, you can't surprise a man with a dog. You can see that it is just a simple sentence. It has one verbal structure in it, coordinating and making sure that the sentence is well written. It's an expression that is straightforward. You can understand what is there, and there is no other thing that just that you know that this is a sentence. If we have an incomplete expression there, or we have something that is cut off, we may say that it is not a simple sentence. However, what we're going to do is this. Having read this example, I want you to try your hands on maybe about 2 or 3 other examples of a simple sentence. But what you should know is this, that always at all time, you must try as much as possible to know that in a simple sentence, you have one verbal structure. So moving on from there, we'll move to a complex sentence. A complex sentence in its own will have an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. What I mean by this is this. In a complex sentence, you have a main clause and at least one or 2 subordinate clauses. 1 or 2 subordinate clauses.
Can you hear me?
If you look at the first example, the main clause there is diplomacy is the art of saying nice doggy. That is our main clause. The other part, until you can find a rug, is a subordinate clause. Now, bringing both together, you have a complex sentence. Now, the other part, the second example, when you are on the internet, that is a subordinate clause. Nobody knows you are a dog, that is the main clause. So this is how a complex sentence is formed. Now, I could actually bring in another sentence and I can say, when you are on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog until you can find a rock. Now, in the new sentence I just made, you have 2 dependent clauses or 2 subordinate clauses, and you have 1 main clause. The main clause there is nobody knows you're a dog. The 2 subordinate clauses are when you're on the internet and until you find a rock. So you should know that when you're forming a complex sentence, you need 1 main clause and at least 1 subordinate clause or dependent clause. Moving away from there, we have the compound sentence. Basically put, a compound sentence is when you have 2 main clauses joined together by a coordinating conjunction. A coordinating conjunction. You have and, but, or as our major coordinating conjunctions. So if you can use any of these three in your sentences, and you are able to bring two main clauses together to form one expression, what you have formed is a compound sentence. It is possible that one, if you use a particular subject, the subject may go ahead to have its effect on the second part. So I can say, he killed a dog and moved the car. He killed a dog and moved the car. What that sentence is trying to explain is that he killed a dog and he moved a car. Just because I don't want to repeat
sorry, sorry, sir. Taiwo, please mute yourself. And I kept muting you, but you keep muting your unmuting yourself. Please mute yourself. Taiwo Ayomide. Good. You can continue, sir.
So, as I said, he killed a dog and he moved the car. Those are the two sentences that we have. Those are the two main clauses that we have. Now, I've joined them together with a coordinating conjunction and with that, I have a compound sentence. So if I want to write that, I can just say, he killed a dog and moved a car. The same subject that I have in the first sentence is the same that I have in the second sentence. Just because I don't want to repeat it and I don't want to make it a kind of tautology, that is why I have removed it in the second main clause and I have it as a compound sentence. That is just basically how it works. If you look at the example that we have, cry havoc and let sleep the dogs of war. Now, cry havoc is a clause. Let sleep the dogs of war is another clause. Now, each of these are separate clauses that have meanings on their own. And then we have been able to bring them together with the coordinating conjunction and that is why we can call these a compound sentence. Now, lastly on it, this is a compound complex sentence. It is very simple. All you need to do is your understanding about complex sentence and the understanding about compound sentence. You bring them together and then you're fine. So what we are trying to say invariably is this. For you to have a compound complex sentence, you need at least two main clauses and at least one subordinate clause. You need at least two main clauses and at least one subordinate clause. So if you're going to form a compound sentence, remember, the way to form a complex sentence is that you have one main clause and at least one subordinate clause. But for the compound sentence, you need two main clauses to form it. So if you have that, it means you are going to bring in two main clauses and at least one subordinate clause. Now, if you look at our example, when a dog bites a man, that is not news because it happens so often. But if a man bites a dog, that is a news. Now, if you look at this sentence very well, you realize that we have two subordinate clauses, and then we have two main clauses. Two subordinate clauses, and then we have two main clauses. So by the time you are able to form this is a perfect example of a compound complex sentence. Moving on from there quickly, the second part is the sentence type by function. Now, for every expression that we give, they carry out something. They have a responsorial effect on anybody that we have given it out to or somebody that was listening to us. The first type is a declarative sentence. That is when you use a sentence to make a statement. The second one is the interrogative sentence, when you use a sentence to ask a question. The third one is the imperative sentence, when you use a sentence to give a command. And the last one is an exclamatory sentence, when you use a sentence to express emotions. So these are the 4 functions that our sentences can carry out. You can use a sentence to carry out a command. You can use it to express an emotion. You can use it to make a statement, to express a statement, and you can use it to ask a question. So for each of these that we have, let us look at how they are formed or definition for each of them. Now, how do you know a declarative sentence? A declarative sentence states a fact and ends with a period, or what you call the full stop. It has a fact stated. It expresses a fact. For example, it has every attribute of a dog except loyalty. It has every attribute of a dog except loyalty. Now, that is a fact stated. It begins with a capital letter and it ends with a full stop. So you can also form yours too. So all you need to know is that when you declare something, when you make a fact, when you express something, you have used your sentence as a declarative sentence. Going from there, we have an imperative sentence. An imperative sentence gives a command. It gives a command. However, it may end with an exclamation mark or a period. It may end with an exclamation mark or a period. So when you command somebody to do something, you have just made an imperative sentence. If you look at someone and you tell the person, you go out. Now, the way you say it, there will always be an exclamation at the end of it. Now, if you say it with a commanding tone, if you say it in a commanding tone, that is an imperative sentence. So that is one of the ways you can use your sentence. Moving on from there, the interrogative sentence. Now, we use our interrogative sentence to ask questions. You can use who, you can use when, you can use how. We know how we ask questions. So anytime you make a question, you have just used a sentence as an interrogator, or you've just formed an interrogative sentence. So that is one of the functions of your sentence. And lastly, the exclamatory sentence. The exclamatory sentence expresses excitement or emotions, and then it ends with the exclamation mark. If you have the exclamation mark there, you don't need to add full stop. So the exclamation mark represents what you call your full stop, provided you are not expressing a declarative statement. So I want you to put that to mind and know that these are the ways you can use a sentence. So that is at the end of our class today. But before I end the class, I would like to rush us back to where we started from and what we're discussing. We're discussing the sentence. I said a sentence will give a complete thought, and basically it must have a subject and a verb. So for whatever you're writing or whatever you're reading, you must be able to differentiate a sentence from every other part of the grammatical construction. And we also said that a sentence can convey a statement, a question, an exclamation, or a command. And then we said it could contain or consist of a main clause and one or more subordinate clauses. And then we talk about the typology, saying that we have two typologies of the sentence. We have sentence type by structure and sentence type by functions. For the structure, we have the simple, the complex, the compound, and the compound complex. And for the simple, we were able to say that a simple sentence would have just a main clause in it. Just a main clause in it. A complex sentence will have one main clause and at least one subordinate clause. A compound sentence will have two main clauses, and then a compound complex sentence will have two main clauses and at least one subordinate clause. So those are the things that we'll discuss about the types of sentences by structure. And moving on to types of sentences by function. That is, what do we use our sentences for? How do we use them? You can use them to declare a statement. You can use them to ask a question. You can use them to give a command, and then you can use them to express emotions. So when you're reading a passage, you should be able to differentiate a declarative sentence from an interrogative sentence, and you should be able to differentiate an imperative statement from an exclamatory statement or sentence at that. So, and as such, you should not confuse yourself when you have an imperative statement and an exclamatory statement. So when a command is given, you should not take it as when somebody is trying to express an emotion. And when an emotion is expressed, you should not mistake that for a command. So those are the functions of the sentence. So anytime you're giving out a sentence or anytime you're saying something, you should know the function it will carry out. You may not get this if you still don't know how this works. So just as we have in the example, a lie told often becomes the truth. That is a declarative statement. It's a fact. A declarative statement will give you a fact, and it will end with a full stop. An interrogative statement will start with WH words or sometimes the H word. So you can say, what is history but a fable agreed upon? If I'm not going to use that, I can say, when will history become a fable not to be agreed upon? I can say, how will history not be taken as a fable agreed upon? Now, I've been able to bring in several question words. Though they are questions, but in their own, they are sentences. We call them interrogative sentences, or we call them question statements. And then the next one is the imperative statement or the sentence. Yes, you use it to give a command. Get in your tanks. Get in your tanks. You can either end a command with a full stop or an exclamation mark. So that is how it works. And lastly, for the exclamatory sentence, ouch. You see, after the ouch, you have an exclamation mark. That hurts. Ouch, that hurts. So if you have any expression, you have any emotional expression, you use the exclamatory sentence. Compulsorily, you must have an exclamatory mark with it. So that is where we're going to stop for today. So before I go, is there anybody with a question? Is there anybody with a question? In the absence of any question, thank you very much. And as I will always say, for everything that you have learned, try as much as possible to put them to use. Now, for those of you that are writing your UTME, sometimes they may ask you to identify the function of some of sentences. They may ask you to identify a declarative sentence. They may ask you to identify an interrogative statement. They may ask you to identify an imperative statement or an exclamatory statement. Or sometimes they may ask you to identify a main clause or a subordinate clause in an expression. So you must put this to practice and you must be able to form them. You must be able to construct such. So do not relent on this. Make sure that everything you are taught, you put them to use. That is when you grow from your performance into a competent person. By the time you're able to perform very well and you continue that way, you become competent with the English grammar. And then anywhere you find yourself, anywhere you're asked to use the English language, you can use it like a native speaker. So thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful day.